In front of millions of Americans, Audrey Meadows and Jackie Gleason looked like the perfect TV couple on the Honeymooners. But what if that perfect chemistry was hiding something much darker? For decades, Audrey stayed silent. Then, at 73, she finally told the truth. So what really happened behind the cameras of one of America's most beloved shows? Join us as we uncover the truth behind Audrey Meadows and Jackie Gleason. The illusion of perfection. In the 1950s, The Honeymooners was more than just a sitcom. It was part of American life. Families gathered around their television sets to laugh at the everyday struggles of Ralph and Alice Cramden. The show captured something familiar and comforting for millions of working-class Americans. Jackie Gleason's character, Ralph, was loud, funny, and full of dreams that always seemed to fall just out of reach. Audrey Meadows played Alice, his sharp, witty wife, who always brought him back down to earth with a clever remark or a raised eyebrow. The chemistry between them felt effortless. Viewers loved watching Ralph's wild ideas get gently knocked down by Alice's steady presence. Their relationship on screen felt real, almost like watching a true married couple. Audrey Meadows seemed to balance Jackie Gleason perfectly. She was the calm to his storm. People saw their characters as a team. Ralph was the big talker. Alice was the one with common sense. Audiences loved Alice. She wasn't just another TV wife standing in the background. She had strength, humor, and dignity. She gave as good as she got, and week after week, people tuned in because they loved watching the way these two very different people managed to make it work. The Honeymooners became a cultural icon because of that dynamic. To millions, it was pure TV magic. But what people didn't know was that the laughter they saw on screen was hiding something very different behind the scenes. While America saw a warm and funny partnership, the truth on set was far more uncomfortable. Right from the start, the working relationship between Audrey Meadows and Jackie Gleason was tense. It didn't begin with friendship or teamwork. It started with rejection. When Audrey first auditioned for the role of Alice, Jackie didn't want her. He thought she was too refined, too polished, and too glamorous to play a tough, working-class housewife from Brooklyn. Jackie had a clear picture in his mind of what Alice should look like. And in his eyes, Audrey didn't fit that at all. He rejected her before she even had a chance to prove herself. But Audrey was determined. She wasn't someone who gave up easily. Knowing exactly what Jackie wanted, she came up with a smart plan. She had a photographer take pictures of her dressed in an old housecoat, her hair messy and with no makeup. She wanted to show him that she could be that working-class woman he imagined. When Jackie saw those photos, he changed his mind. She got the part. Even with that small victory, it was clear from the beginning that this was Jackie's show. Everything revolved around him. He controlled the writing, the production, and the direction. No one changed a line of dialogue without his approval. Cast members joked that being on set with him felt like entering someone else's kingdom. And in that kingdom, Jackie was the king, and everyone else followed his lead, whether they liked it or not. As the show grew in popularity, the distance between Audrey and Jackie only widened. People watching at home assumed that the two stars must have been close friends, maybe even sharing laughs and dinners after filming ended. But that was far from the truth. Off-camera, there wasn't much of a relationship at all. Audrey and Jackie rarely spoke about anything other than work. There were no long conversations or personal connections. Once the cameras stopped rolling, they each went their separate ways. Audrey quickly realized that their on-screen marriage was nothing more than a performance, and that performance came with its own set of challenges. Audrey understood that her role wasn't just to play Alice. It was to play Alice Jackie's way. Every scene, every joke, and every word was done with his approval. She had to walk a careful line. She needed to be funny, but not too funny. She could be sharp, but never sharper than him. She had to keep up with his energy, but never outshine him. For Audrey, it was exhausting. While the rest of the country laughed along with Ralph and Alice, she carried the weight of that behind-the-scenes reality by herself. And things were only going to get harder from there. What came next would test Audrey's strength in ways no one could have imagined. Jackie Gleason's dark side. Behind the laughter and charm that made The Honeymooners a classic, Jackie Gleason was a man who demanded total control. He didn't just star in the show, he ran it. Everything about The Honeymooners, from the writing to the directing to the overall tone, came down to Jackie's decisions. He didn't trust other people to shape the show. It had to be his way, or nothing at all. For most TV shows, there's a whole team of writers and producers who help guide the creative process. That wasn't the case here. Jackie either wrote the scripts himself or made final changes on everything before filming. Directors might have been listed in the credits, but everyone on set knew that Jackie was the one truly calling the shots. Even the smallest details had to pass his approval. If he didn't like a joke, it was cut. If a scene didn't feel right to him, it was changed on the spot. One of the most unusual things about The Honeymooners was that Jackie refused to rehearse. In most television productions, the cast spends days practicing their lines, rehearsing blocking, and going over the timing of scenes. Jackie didn't believe in that process. He thought rehearsals ruined the natural flow of a scene. Instead, he wanted everything to feel fresh and spontaneous. His rule was simple: one take only. Why did he do this? It wasn't just a preference, it was an obsession. Jackie believed that too much preparation made comedy feel fake. He wanted every moment to come across like real life, like viewers were watching something unfold for the first time. That's also why he didn't always memorize his lines. Sometimes he would ad-lib right in the middle of a scene. It kept his co-stars on their toes, whether they liked it or not. Jackie's need for control came with something even more difficult: his famous temper. Stories from behind the scenes paint a picture of a man who could be funny one minute and furious the next. His mood could change without warning. Crew members often described working on The Honeymooners as walking on eggshells. You never knew when Jackie might explode. There were moments when Jackie's outbursts were loud enough for people outside the studio to hear. If a joke didn't land the way he wanted, or if someone flubbed a line, he didn't just quietly correct it, he shouted. Sometimes he would storm off the set in the middle of filming. Other times, he would stand in front of everyone and let his anger boil over. The crew, the other actors, even the producers, they all knew that upsetting Jackie meant risking the whole production. One crew member famously said that the tension on set was so thick you could cut it with a knife. People stood by their positions silently, hoping they wouldn't be the next target of one of his tirades. It was a constant balancing act. Everyone wanted the show to be great, but they also didn't want to set Jackie off. Even small mistakes could trigger him. If someone coughed during a take, or if a light flickered in the studio, Jackie might stop everything to yell about it. His perfectionism was part of why the show was so good, but it was also why working with him could be so exhausting. This wasn't just about having a short temper, it was about ego. Jackie knew he was a star, and he expected everyone around him to treat him like one. For Audrey Meadows, working under these conditions meant learning to keep quiet and keep moving. While audiences at home saw a funny, clever housewife trading jabs with her husband, Audrey was facing constant pressure just to keep up with Jackie's moods. She knew that her job depended not only on being talented, but on knowing exactly how to handle him. One of the hardest parts of her job wasn't acting. It was staying calm during Jackie's mood swings. Sometimes he would give her the cold shoulder for days at a time, barely speaking to her unless it was during filming. Other days, he would suddenly turn on the charm as if nothing had happened. Audrey had no way of knowing which Jackie she would face when she walked into work. And while Jackie rarely attacked her personally in front of others, that didn't mean she was safe from his moods. If a scene didn't go perfectly, she might get criticized, not always directly, but often in subtle public ways that stung even more. Audrey had to perform a professional tightrope act every day. She needed to match Jackie's energy on screen, delivering lines with the same sharp timing and humor that made the show work. But she could never go too far. If she became too funny or stole too much attention in a scene, it might upset Jackie. Being too good at her job could actually be dangerous for her career. Still, Audrey kept her focus. She smiled on set, delivered her lines, and made sure that the audience never suspected anything was wrong. No matter how difficult things got, she kept showing up, knowing that America loved Alice Cramden, even if working with Ralph Cramden was sometimes a nightmare. But as the stress on set built higher, it became clear that something would eventually have to give. And soon, a major turning point would change everything for good. Silence and pressure. In the 1950s, Hollywood was a very different place for women, especially actresses. The unspoken rule for women in the industry was simple: smile, endure, and don't speak. Actresses were expected to show up, do their job, and keep their private lives, especially their struggles, hidden from the public. Speaking up about mistreatment, unfair treatment, or personal problems was seen as unacceptable. For many women, it wasn't just about being polite, it was about survival. If a woman dared to speak out against a major star, a producer, or a powerful studio head, it could destroy her career. A single complaint could lead to fewer roles, fewer auditions, or even total rejection from the industry. At that time, there was also the very real fear of blacklisting. If word got around that an actress was difficult or uncooperative, she could find herself quietly pushed out of the business. No one wanted to work with someone seen as a troublemaker, no matter how talented she was. And in the 1950s, it wasn't always clear what counted as trouble. For women, even standing up for basic respect on set could be seen as crossing a line. Audrey Meadows knew this reality well. She was smart. She understood the world she was working in, and she knew that staying silent about Jackie Gleason's behavior wasn't just about protecting her job on the Honeymooners. It was about protecting her future. If she spoke up publicly, it could have been seen as attacking one of the most powerful entertainers on television. That would not have ended well for her. It wasn't just the culture of Hollywood that kept Audrey quiet. The people in charge of the Honeymooners had their own reasons for wanting her to stay silent, too. CBS executives knew they had something special. The Honeymooners wasn't just another show, it was a hit. Viewers across America tuned in every week to watch Ralph and Alice Cramden argue, laugh, and make up. People loved the characters, the humor, and the feeling of seeing themselves in the struggles of that working-class couple. As far as CBS was concerned, they had lightning in a bottle. That's the phrase they used, and they were determined to protect it. It didn't matter if the working conditions were hard or if Jackie Gleason was difficult to work with. What mattered to the network was that the show was popular, making money and building CBS's reputation in the television world. If Audrey Meadows had spoken out about what was really happening behind the scenes, it would have threatened all of that. CBS didn't want headlines about bad behavior on set. They didn't want viewers thinking about fights, tempers, or stress when they watched the show. They wanted people to laugh, enjoy, and tune in again next week. Despite all the outside pressure, Audrey also had her own personal reasons for staying silent. One of the most important was her respect for the audience. Audrey understood that millions of hardworking American families were gathering around their televisions each week to watch The Honeymooners. For many people, this show was an escape from their own problems. It was one of the few times they could sit together, laugh, and enjoy themselves as a family. Audrey didn't want to be the person who spoiled that magic. She knew that if stories started to come out about fights on set or bad behavior behind the scenes, it could ruin the show for the people who loved it most. She valued the connection the audience had with the characters, and she didn't want to take that away from them. But it's important to understand that Audrey's silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. She wasn't staying quiet because she was afraid to stand up for herself. She was staying quiet because she was smart enough to see the bigger picture. Speaking out might have given her temporary satisfaction, but it could have destroyed everything she had worked so hard to build. But as time went on, it was clear that holding in all that frustration couldn't last forever. And soon, Audrey would have to make a decision that would finally change the game. Behind closed doors. While the world saw Audrey Meadows smiling on camera, laughing with Jackie Gleason as Alice Cramden, the real story was happening behind closed doors. Only a small circle of close friends and family knew the emotional weight she was carrying. Audrey didn't often talk about her struggles with the public, but in private, she couldn't always hide the truth. To those she trusted most, she spoke honestly about how difficult it was working with Gleason. She talked about the emotional abuse she endured, not in shouting matches or dramatic scenes, but in cold silences, harsh words, and the constant tension that followed her around the set. Audrey described feelings of deep loneliness, even while surrounded by people in the studio. She often said that the isolation was the hardest part. She was working side by side with a man who helped shape her career, but who also made her feel invisible when the cameras weren't rolling. It wasn't just about work frustration. This was personal. Audrey had signed up to act, to make people laugh, and to build something good. Instead, she found herself trapped in a difficult environment where kindness was rare and support was even rarer. She confessed to close friends that some days she dreaded going to work, not because of the lines or the role, but because she didn't know how she'd be treated when she got there. The stress didn't stay at the studio. It followed her home, affecting her sleep, her confidence, and her peace of mind. Even with professional success, Audrey admitted privately that she felt like she was walking through her career alone. Each day on set felt like a gamble. Would Jackie Gleason show up ready to work like a professional? Or would he be distant, cold, or even angry? Audrey never knew. That uncertainty was exhausting. She often described it as feeling like she was performing on a tightrope. Every word, every look, and every scene had to be carefully done. She had to make sure she was funny, but not too funny. She had to play along with Gleason's improvisations, but avoid accidentally outshining him. One wrong move, one moment where Jackie thought she was stepping out of her place, could mean another cold shoulder, or worse, public embarrassment in front of the crew. She was doing two jobs at once, performing for the audience while managing Gleason's moods. Both required energy. Both drained her. Even after the Honeymooners ended, the emotional scars didn't disappear. Years later, when Jackie Gleason's name came up in interviews or conversations, those close to Audrey could see it in her face. A tightening of her expression, a quiet pause, or a quick change of subject told the whole story. Some emotional wounds don't leave visible marks, but they stay under the surface, showing up at unexpected moments. It wasn't all bitterness. Audrey was always honest about one thing: the show had helped her career. She respected the work itself, and she appreciated the role of Alice Cramden for what it was: a powerful, funny, relatable character that touched millions of lives. But that appreciation didn't erase the emotional cost. For Audrey, there was always a split inside. On one hand, gratitude for being part of something important. On the other hand, sorrow for what that opportunity had taken from her personally. She couldn't fully celebrate what she'd achieved without remembering how hard it had been to survive the experience behind the scenes. And soon, that hidden story would finally start to come to light, breaking the silence. For decades, Audrey Meadows kept quiet about what really happened behind the scenes of the Honeymooners. While others might have been tempted to tell their story sooner, Audrey chose patience. But when she finally spoke up at the age of 73, her motivation wasn't anger or revenge. It was clarity. She had lived long enough to understand the full picture of what she had been through, and she finally felt ready to tell the truth in her own words, on her own terms. One of the biggest reasons Audrey stayed silent for so long was fear. Not just fear of Gleason's power, but fear of the industry itself. Back in the 1950s, speaking out against a major star could easily destroy a woman's career. Studios, producers, and even the press were more likely to side with the male star than with a supporting actress. The world simply wasn't ready to hear a woman's side of the story, especially when that story might ruin the shine of something America loved. But by the time Audrey reached her 70s, the world had changed. Audiences were beginning to welcome the behind-the-scenes truths from women in Hollywood. People were starting to ask questions about what really went on behind the sets of those perfect TV shows. They wanted to know what women had to put up with just to survive in the business. Audrey recognized this shift. She wasn't interested in causing a scandal or rewriting history out of spite. She simply saw that for the first time, people were ready to hear what she had always known. She was finally free to speak not out of fear, but from a place of honesty, maturity, and peace with the past. When Audrey finally shared her story, it didn't come in the form of a dramatic tell-all. She wasn't interested in trashing anyone or destroying the image of the Honeymooners. Instead, her revelations were shared with calm honesty. They appeared in interviews, memoirs, and even private letters that later surfaced. Audrey didn't call Jackie Gleason a monster, but she also didn't hold back the truth about who he was. She was careful to give credit where credit was due. Gleason was a comedic genius. He created something special. He helped shape television comedy in a way that still matters today. But Audrey also made it clear that genius doesn't excuse cruelty. One of the key phrases that stuck with people was her simple, powerful admission: "We made history, but it came at a price." That one sentence captured everything. Yes, the show was successful. Yes, it became a part of American television history. But behind that success was a real, painful human story. Audrey described Gleason as a bully, not in a way meant to shock people, but in a way that explained why the experience had been so hard for her personally. She talked about the cold treatment, the unpredictable moods, and the emotional strain of working with someone who treated her like a rival instead of a partner. One of the most fascinating things Audrey finally explained was the truth behind the famous chemistry between Ralph and Alice Cramden. For years, audiences had believed that the magic on screen came from a warm, funny connection between Jackie Gleason and Audrey Meadows. The reality couldn't have been more different. Audrey revealed that it worked because they didn't like each other. That tension, that friction, was what gave their scenes their sharp edge. The banter between Ralph and Alice didn't feel fake, because, in a way, it wasn't. The quick comebacks, the looks of frustration, and the constant back and forth were fueled by their real-life discomfort with each other. Audiences weren't watching two best friends making a TV show. They were watching two professionals who, underneath the humor, were engaged in something closer to combat than collaboration. It wasn't a friendship. It was survival. Audrey made it clear that this dynamic wasn't necessarily something she wanted. It was simply the reality of the situation. She had to find a way to turn that friction into something valuable. And in the end, that's exactly what she did. The sharp, witty Alice Cramden wasn't just a character, it was also Audrey's armor. It was how she got through the days when Gleason was at his most difficult. By telling the truth later in life, Audrey gave the Honeymooners a deeper, more honest meaning. It wasn't just a comedy. It was a story of hard work, of hidden struggle, and of a woman turning real pain into lasting art. Gleason's death and fallout. When Jackie Gleason passed away in 1987, it brought a strange mix of emotions for Audrey Meadows. For many years, they had worked side by side on the Honeymooners, building something that millions of Americans adored. But behind all that laughter was a personal story filled with difficulty, frustration, and emotional wounds that never fully healed. Audrey didn't make a big show of her presence at Gleason's funeral. She attended, but she kept it quiet and respectful. She didn't stand up to speak or seek attention. that was never her way. Her appearance was understated, just like much of her public life after the show. It wasn't about making a statement to the press. It was about showing personal respect for someone she had shared a major part of her life with, no matter how complicated it had been. After the funeral, Audrey shared her real feelings in private with those close to her. She didn't speak with hatred or bitterness. Instead, her words carried a thoughtful, honest weight. To one close friend, she said simply, "I forgave him, but I never forgot." Those words said everything. Audrey chose forgiveness because holding on to hate only hurts the person who carries it. But forgiving didn't mean pretending nothing bad had happened. She remembered clearly the way she had been treated. She remembered the stress, the tension, and the feeling of walking on eggshells for years. That never left her. Forgiveness gave her peace, but memory gave her truth. For Audrey, Gleason's death didn't erase the past, but it did give her a sense of final closure. Not because his passing solved everything, but because by that point, she had finally started to speak her full truth. Audrey didn't want her story to be about bitterness or revenge. She wanted it to be about balance. She knew Jackie Gleason was a television icon. She didn't deny his talent or his genius, but she also refused to pretend that genius excused bad behavior. That's why, when she talked about those years later in life, she made sure it wasn't about tearing him down. It was about lifting herself up. She wanted people to know that while the Honeymooners had given her fame, it had also taken something from her emotionally. Her honesty wasn't about revenge, it was about making sure her story was finally complete. After spending so much of her life being known as Alice Cramden, Audrey finally gave herself permission to be something more. She was no longer just the TV wife everyone remembered. She was Audrey Meadows, a smart, talented actress who had carried herself with grace under pressure. Sharing her truth helped her close that chapter not as a victim, but as a survivor who finally had control of her own story. One of the deepest truths of Audrey's life was about control. During her time on the Honeymooners, Jackie Gleason controlled almost everything. He decided how the show was run. He shaped the scripts. He dictated how much rehearsal would happen. He even tried to shape the public's view of their on-screen relationship. But when it came to telling the real story, that power was finally Audrey's. Gleason could control the set, but Audrey controlled her life's narrative. She held that power not through bitterness, but through choice. She chose when to speak, how to speak, and what she wanted to share. It was her voice, in her time, on her terms. In the end, Audrey Meadows didn't let the hardships define her. She carried both the good and the bad, forgiving but never forgetting. And in doing so, she showed how strength sometimes comes in quiet, steady forms. If you found this video interesting, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next story from Classic Hollywood.